Yeah. Okay, fine. Let's make a start. Hi, I'm Georgie Vestey, and I have a podcast, Dead Honest. And I wanted to do a session for people who have been to a podcasting course, one of those day podcasting courses, and thinks, yeah, I really want to start a podcast. How difficult can it be? You go to one of those day podcasting courses, you come away and you think, yeah, I think I've got a pretty good handle on that. And then it all goes pear-shaped, because really you cannot learn what you need to know in a day. It's an insult to the people who make podcasts to think that you can, unless of course you're a very experienced audio producer, in which case it's just a sort of retraining session. So this session tonight is really for people who are entry level, for people who, like me, have no audio experience, no background. I mean, I did do a series about 12 years ago on community radio, but that was very limited, tiny little, really nothing. And I want to sort of give you some advice that would help you when you go forward. I think a lot of the time we're given advice that's a bit like telling you to run a marathon on flip-flops, and you sort of get to about 2 kilometers in and you think, my feet are hurting, I've got blisters. I should never have started with flip-flops, and no, you shouldn't. This is a session to sort of help you get a bit fit with the idea of how I'm going to take this forward and how I'm going to survive going right the way around, the whole 42K. I'm quite blunt. I'm half Australian, so I can be quite blunt. I am not going to give you sort of a varnished view of what it's like to do a podcast. I'm going to tell you how it was for me. The sort of questions that I will hopefully answer are the ones that I wish somebody had spoken to me about before I had really started, and things I've learned along the way that have been really helpful. I've just thought, God, I wish I'd known that 5 months ago. That would have made that simpler. So I hope from this session, what you're going to get is some useful tips, some ideas about how you can apply them, and also some confidence that if things start going pear-shaped, it's survivable. You've just got to keep going, yeah? Because I did it, and bluntly, you cannot meet a more moronic person when it comes to technology or anything like that. So I really wanted to be that sort of person who says, look, if I can do it, seriously, you can do it. You'll do it probably in 10 times faster than I ever did, and do a 20 times better job. Okay. The other thing I want to just say is that there are no questions that are too stupid. If they are, I've asked them. And if you do want to ask questions, if you can put them through on the YouTube chat, and then they'll come back through to me magically. Apparently, I have no idea how that works. I don't use YouTube. Anyway, that's where I'm coming from. Now, I've had to make a couple of assumptions about who you are. I'm assuming that you are new podcasters, or you're thinking about starting a podcast. You'd like to start a podcast. You're not quite sure what's involved, how much effort and energy you're going to have to put into it. That by and large, you're going to be on a limited budget, and that you're going to be doing an interview type podcast, because that's mostly what is on podcasting genres. They're mostly interview-based podcasts, and that's what I do. So I think it's probably quite relevant that I do something that's based on my experience. There is another thing I should mention. We're going to go through quite a lot of notes, quite a lot of information, and I don't want you to feel that you have to sit there and write down every last little thing. I've actually prepared, here's something I prepared earlier, True Blue Peter style, a document which is pretty much going to cover everything that I'm talking about tonight, and also has some good articles at the back of it, hyperlinks in the back to articles that I found useful. I tend to go for people who are no bullshit, and that's the other thing about being half Australian. I'm a bit sweary, but they're the people who I relate to. I don't want to read some over-caffeinated American gushy hype. It just doesn't help me. It's just not the way I work. Okay, so what are you going to need to know to think about before you start a podcast? And I'm going to be looking down a bit, because I'm looking at my notes so I can make sure I keep in a flow and I don't miss anything. I'm quite sort of particular about that. I just don't want this to not be useful for you. Okay, so the things you're going to have to think about if you're starting a podcast, the hard questions first, and the main one is why? Why do you want to start a podcast? Okay, why do you want to start a podcast? What do you want to say? We're going to go into these in each one in a little bit more depth. Who do you want to say it to? So, who's your audience? And why should you be the one to make it? Why you? Why you? And also, who's the competition? Okay, so they're the questions that you're really going to need to think about. Now, I'm going to get rid of one thing up front, and that's the thing of you want to make a podcast because you want to make money. I don't make money from my podcast. I have an income that comes from somewhere else, so I don't need to make money from my podcast. And I want to get this out of the way quite quickly because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the fact you can make money from podcasts. So I'm just going to throw out a few facts. Okay, 99% of podcasts, yeah, are not profitable. 99%. And you're talking about people who are big players, okay? These are not people like us. These are the big players, and even they can't necessarily make a profit from their podcasts. Big advertisers will want roughly 40,000 downloads per episode, yeah? And that accounts for less than 1% of podcasts have 40,000 downloads per episode. Patreon, if you're thinking of Patreon, there are about 10,000 podcast producers on Patreon. And I think 18 of them have about 5,000 members. Yeah. So that means 0.002% of podcasters are making money from Patreon. Yeah. So that it just shows you this is a really tough job. And there's something I read today, which I thought was really good. It's Tim Ferriss. He says, if you never got paid for podcasting, would the skills and relationships you developed be enough to keep you going? If the answer is no, I'd pull the trigger. So I just want to put that out there at the beginning, because if you're thinking I'm going to be talking about monetizing your podcast, I'm not. I hope somebody else has in the festival, and I hope that somebody can give you that advice, but it won't be coming from me. So let's look at the reasons why you want to start your podcast. There are lots of different reasons. You might want to connect to interesting people. You might want to generate business leads. You might want to build recognition, as an industry leader. You might want to share an important message or have fun. One I've put in is you might want to challenge yourself. I think that's quite important, because you need to think about what success is going to look like to you. Yeah. So once you've answered those questions, it will help you determine when you are achieving that, whether that's actually what you've got. So for instance, for somebody like me, when I look at that equation, when I started, I wanted about 50% was an important message. Dead Honest is about the people who help us when we die, and when we're dead, people who are behind the front line. I wanted 50% sharing this important message about this group of people, 20% was connecting with interesting people, and about 30% was going to be the challenge. Yeah, the editing, I hadn't done that before, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So how's that worked out for me? Okay, so I reckon 95% is challenging myself, 3% is sharing an important message, because I've only made seven episodes I've made, and about 2% of my time is spent meeting interesting people. So that gives you some idea of how that worked out for me. Having said that, I am really proud to have made what I've done. I'm happy that the podcast downloads that I've got, I get about 250 an episode. So that puts me in about the top 40%. I'm proud that I'm getting better every month that goes past. This is not a weekly thing. This is a monthly, yearly type of thing. And the thing is, I'm probably most proud of is that I've stuck with it. I've actually done something that I said I was going to do, and I have stuck with it. And that's the thing when we talk about, are you batshit crazy? Because it's going to require real reserves of perseverance. And I'm going to come back to how what I did to make that happen for me a bit later on. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is, what's your podcast about? You've got to be able to summarize your podcast. They talk about that dreadful American thing of, it's got to be an elevator pitch, step into an elevator, you've got 10 seconds. Tell me what your podcast's about. So you've got to sort of try and get it down to about 10 words. And I felt the simplest thing for me to do is, because actually this probably took me about 5 months, just to give you, this is going to be a quick process. And I'm making this sound really linear, but a lot of the things that I've learned like, 3 steps down the line when I should have learned them. But anyway, you're going to be much better than I am at this. Okay, so if somebody said to me, what's your podcast about? I start off by saying, I want to make a podcast about death. Okay, well, that sounds quite interesting. What, the people who work in death, or counselors, or are you talking about people who make coffins, or what are you talking about? And I was like, oh no, not grief podcast, because no, there are loads of those. No, what I mean is that the people, the people who work with it, oh, okay, so like the coffin makers and the paramedics, and oh, okay, well, no, not like the coffin makers. No, I'm interested in that, but it's not really my professional background. No, I'm more interested in the paramedics. Okay, so you want to make a podcast about paramedics who work with death? No, well, not exactly the paramedics. No, not so much that, because they get a lot of airtime. No, I'm more interested in the people who work behind the paramedics, the people who are like further back in the shadows. So you want to make a podcast about death professionals who work behind the front line? Yep, that's it. I want to make a podcast about death professionals who work behind the front lines. And that says it. Now, I swear to God, if you thought that was one morning's work over a cup of coffee, you must be kidding. That took a very long time for me to get to that. And it was a very frustrating process. But the point about it is that if you can narrow it right down, get into that niche. I started with, I wanted to make a podcast around death. I ended up with, I'm making a podcast about death professionals who work behind the first responders. Yeah. I mean, it's very, very niche, and that's really critically important. You want to get as niche as you can, because that's where your point of difference is going to be. Okay, so who's your audience going to be? People talk about creating an avatar. You've got to think of who your audience is going to be. Is she a middle-aged woman who's just dropped the kids at school? Is he a commuter going into work? Is she like a businesswoman who's jumping on a plane? Whatever. The reason it's actually quite useful to do this, if you can, is because when you hit an editorial snag, you can sort of pretend they're in the room with you and go, you know what, Deirdre, would you prefer an episode on funeral directors, or would you prefer an episode on mortuary workers, if I had to make a choice? Do you know what I mean? You can sort of have that conversation with them, because I'm also imagining that you are doing this on your own, that this is quite a lonely experience, and you need to have those mechanisms where you can sort of feed back to yourself. Yeah, that's quite a useful one. So how did that work for me? It didn't. I couldn't. I used to make it up when people asked me, and it would change all the time. And the reason I don't feel so bad about that now is because I've just started a Twitter account, Dead Honest Talk. Do follow me. I've got so few followers, it's hilarious. But anyway, because I'm not very socially media minded, but anyway. And I started to look at my followers. Who are my followers? I have got raging Brexiteers. I have got raging Remainers. I have got professors of neurology. I have got student nurses. I've got retired, HR workers. I've got a couple of dominatrixes. I mean, the breadth of it is fantastic, and I can't pinpoint anything to that. So what I did for my podcast is, when people ask me, what's your audience? I say, okay, there's two types of audience. I have what I call the death curious, which is the general public. And then I have death professionals who are often interested in a topic because it's a colleague that's talking about the subject that I might be interviewing them about. So they're my two sort of general audiences. But if you can get it down to something a bit more concise, then it'll be really helpful when you want to have those editorial discussions. It will also help you if you're looking for sponsorship or advertisers to say, this is my target market. This is, who you can attach yourself to, or who we can think about bringing into the program for sponsorship. So, but for me, I have to be honest with you, it just didn't work. What's your competition? I mean, the simplest thing is to do a Google search, add in your search term for whatever it is that you're particularly interested in, and put podcasts and trawl. I have to say, I think there are many more podcasts around death that I've been able to come across, but I've got a pretty good idea that I'm probably the only one doing a podcast about the death professionals who work behind the front line. Yeah. So I can keep that as a very niche type of area. And then the other thing is, why you? This is the really big question. Why you? Come on, we're independents. We're out here on our own. Why should I be making a podcast? Again, these are the things that you've got to think about. That for you, I hope that you're more of an expert than anybody else on the subject that you want to do, make a program around, or just as importantly, you're more curious than perhaps the people who are already making that podcast. And there are a lot of experts out there making podcasts, but actually we connect to the human passion of people. And so if you're really passionate about something, that'll come across, and you'll be a more engaging presenter than most experts. So I'm just chucking my earpiece in. Your guests haven't been on other podcasts because your topic is so niche. It's really rare that you're going to hear the voices that you're going to put out there. And I think that's quite important because there are so many, I mean, there are over 1 million podcasts now. You have really got to have a point of differentiation. And there are, you know, not another celebrity podcast, wellbeing podcast, because A, they've been heard 1,000 times before. You're not bringing anything new into the mix. So the fact that you might have people who have never been interviewed before, it's really attractive. New voices, fantastic. I think that's really great. And also your content is rarely covered. So again, for somebody like me, I can tell you, hand on my heart, I haven't yet to find a second podcast about death professionals working behind the front line. Do tell me if you find one, because I probably should know about it. And then you've got to think about what's success going to look like. And this is one of the things I want you to remember, okay? It's really important to be micro ambitious. Do not head out there thinking you're going to get 10,000 downloads, okay? My suggestion is that you aim for something like, I don't know, well, okay, 50% of podcasts have 145 downloads per episode over 30 days. Why don't you rate? I mean, that's a great thing to go for. And then if you get more than that, happy days. But, you know, be a little bit, micro ambitious. I like that as a thought, because it's also a kindness to yourself. One of the things that'll burn you out faster than almost the workload that you might put on yourself is your disappointment with yourself that you're not keeping up. And I really don't want that to happen to you, because I am convinced that you have got a great idea, and you are the person to make it. Yeah. So that's the next thing we're going to talk about is format. What's it going to look like? Now, again, I'm going to, there are obviously lots of different genres in podcasting. I'm talking about interviewing podcasts. We're going to talk about like the schedule. You're going to make it daily, weekly, every 2 weeks, once a month. Is it going to come out as and when you want it to come out? My suggestion would be, and this is what works for me, is I actually don't look at podcasting like that. I look at it like a season. So I produce a season of episodes. And in my first season, I produced 6 episodes, and I did that quite deliberately. I have other work commitments that I can't give that sort of attention to it. I also know that I'm on my own. I don't have a PR machine. I don't have a marketing department. I've got to do it myself. So I can't be producing and editing podcasts while I'm trying to market something. I mean, that would just implode. Again, I'd go into the disappointment zone and I'd give up. It's not realistic for somebody like me. And I think we have to be really realistic about what it is that we can do. Yeah, because it's not a race. It's genuinely not a race. You know, get out the program, the podcast that you want to make, that's in the time frame that's workable for you. Don't get caught up on this sort of hamster wheel thing of, oh, well, you've got to, but I've got 150 episodes or 200 episodes, or someone says doing 10,000 downloads. Turn off the noise. Turn off the noise. You're not making it to make 10,000 downloads and whatever to make instant success. It's going to take time, and it's going to take practice. So format, I choose a season, and I choose that because it helps me. I do, you know, 6 to 8. I'll probably do 8 in the next season. I do that from giving myself space. It gives me a chance to market them, which I do really, really badly, I might add. That could do with some work and attention. But it would be done much, much worse if I was trying to put it out at the same time. It's just not required. And I think you run out of steam. Yeah. And then you have less to say. And then the quality of your podcast will drop. So next thing is we're going to talk about is actually the time. How long should your podcast be? And I am a bit of a purist about this. I get a bit fed up listening to podcasts that drivel on, where I think, you know what, show some respect to my time. You could have edited that much, much better. And I'm not going to bother with it. I'm disengaging. Try and get people in that first 60 seconds. What I tend to do, well, actually, let me just step back a bit. So what I've found is the most common formula is about 20, 25 minutes. It's sort of a commutable distance. And you might say, okay, now in time of lockdown or whatever, people have got much more time. If you've got much more to say, I mean, I interview people for usually about an hour, hour and a half. It has got to 2 hours before. You don't need to hear me rambling. I need to do some work to make that listenable for you. I respect your ears. Why would you want to listen to me when you could listen to somebody else? I've got to capture you really quickly. So that's the thing so what I tend to do with my podcast is they're about 20, 22 minutes long. The bit of the interview, what I call my pre-intro, I take a section out of my podcast that I think that's interesting and intriguing, and I plonk it in there. And I think if you're going to listen, only going to listen to that, it's going to be enough to hook you in and think, what the, oh, that sounds a bit, oh, God, wonder what that's all about. And that will keep you going. And then I've got to keep on how I keep you there. So I've got to edit it down. So I do keep you there, that I take out the waffly bits and the extraneous bits. And that's going to bring me on to editing. Or I think it brings me on to editing. No, it doesn't. Not yet. Sorry. We're going to talk about you, the presenter, because this is something that sometimes people ask me. How did you decide that you wanted to be the presenter? Well, what I did is I made an episode. I did a concept episode, and I really recommend this. Don't suddenly think, oh my God, I've got to do a whole season. How am I going to break it down, be micro-ambitious? I'm going to start with a concept episode, and that's going to help me work out whether the format works, whether I like how it's going, whether I need more of me, less of me, whatever. Okay, so do a concept episode. That's what I did. And a friend of mine who's a very successful journalist, he listened to it. And the first thing, he gave me 2 bits of feedback. First thing he said to me is, he said, it sounds like Radio 4. And I thought, oh, fuck, I've really failed, because I did not want to sound like it was on Radio 4. I thought, if I sound like it's on Radio 4, I sound like a clone, and I don't want to sound like a clone. I've got my own voice. So obviously there was a bit of lacking of confidence. I obviously wasn't very confident at that point. And he said, the other thing is, are you going to be in this or not? And I thought, yes, because I'm really interested and I'm passionate about these people, and I've worked alongside these people, and I do want to be it, because I can't think of anybody else who could do it better than me, frankly. And I realized how defensive I was around it. And I thought, yeah, no, damn it, I do want to do it. So when people say to me, and somebody recently did, who's just starting out, and she came to me and she said, look, I've got this idea. What do you think? I'm not sure whether I should present it. I said, okay, fair enough. I said, okay, well, you've told me about your idea. Guess what? You've come to me and pretend like I'm, a big independent producer who's going to take it to BBC Sounds or, Acast or whoever. And I come back to you and I go, yeah, it's a really good idea. I think I know who I'd like to present that. How would you feel? I know if it was me, I'd be like, what do you mean? And I really want you to fight your corner on you presenting your own work. And even if you get bigger people interested. And the reason I say that is because interviewing has to come from a place of curiosity. And say I was to present your podcast, you could brief me. I could probably ask some quite interesting questions, but I'm not going to sound as passionate as you are. I'm not going to stop and pivot on something they've said and take it into a more interesting direction, because I wouldn't know what that more interesting direction is. So I really want you to be your champion, you're being your own presenters. And if you need a bit of radio voice training, then get a bit of voice training. Ask somebody to barter that with you. If you've got the skill that you can offer them, just say, listen, can you give me a bit of voice training? I mean, one of the things I do, which drives me around the bend as an editor when I edit my stuff, is I do this thing of, what's happened? I sort of like, I breathe in the middle of a sentence. I talk about, and when you went back to the scene, did you, and it's like, oh my God, I need some training, but it's okay. It's good enough. It works well enough. But, so I really want you to be your own voices. And the other reason I really want you to be your own voice is because I really want to champion the independent voices that are out there. I don't want you ending up, I don't want you external headphones. Okay, no, do not use the external headphones. Okay, oh God. You can hear me. I can't see you, so I'm going to continue. Okay, great. You can still hear me. This is what happens with me with technology. I am a complete moron, honestly. Anything that can go wrong will go wrong on my watch. I mean, the reason I'm using my son's computer is because I've actually filled up my own computer with so many audio files, it just crashes Zoom now. It just is like, no, forget it. It's constipated. Anyway, that's for another time. Okay, so I'm going to make a bit of a, when podcasting started, okay, there were a lot of independent voices. And I think for a lot of us, that's what got us interested in podcasts. And it was really democratic. Unlike a lot of other media, yeah, where it was the big media and then it bled down into that. What seems to have happened with podcasting, it's gone the other way up. Big media has come in and sort of sucked a lot of the independence out of podcasting and said, hey, we're hip new kids on the block. We do podcasts too. And I sort of go, not so much. It sort of looks like radio on demand to me. It's not really podcasting. Podcasting to me is something quite different. It's your independent voice. It's your passion. That's what I want to hear as a listener. I don't want to hear another expert. I want to hear you because you're passionate about it, or because you've gone off and you've found out about something and it's your passion that I'm engaging with. So yeah, enough about that. Sorry, but that's just a bit of a rant. Now we're going to move on to choosing a name. Up to you. You know, I took a very long time to find the name Dead Honest, and one of the things I think is really important once you find a name that fits who you are. I mean, Dead Honest to me says the style of my program as well. It's about being honest about death, and it sort of has a short word which is quite easy to use and it's easy to type. It phonetically sounds like it is. So if people are coming from other countries and wanting to find out about me, it's pretty easy. They're both words that are commonly used in the English language and therefore commonly translated. May I make a suggestion? Rather wish I'd done this before myself. Check the social media handles of your title before you register it, and check your domain. You can register the domain name as well. I mean, one of the things that happened to me, because it took me so long to get my podcast series off the ground, I had made a trailer and I'd made a concept episode. I'd uploaded it to SoundCloud. I think it's still there. I then made a trailer, uploaded that to SoundCloud because I wanted to hear it, you know, through the headphones, not at my desk sort of thing. I wanted to hear it like an innocent expert sort of thing. And I went online and I typed in Dead Honest trailer. And it said Dead Honest podcast. I thought, oh, of course, yeah, probably because of the concept episode, it's up there. And it wasn't. There was another Dead Honest podcast that had started up after me. I don't begrudge them that. I just took too friggin' long to get my shit together. So they also had the handle Dead Honest Pod for Twitter and probably Instagram, but I don't do Instagram, so that's a bit redundant. But it took me, what that meant is that when my website was set up, I had to do an awful lot of work to get myself above them on the rankings. So they're just things I'd keep in mind. Yeah, just keep it in mind. How are we doing? Oh shit, I've talked for so long. Okay, equipment. We're going to do this, get through this quite quickly. Equipment, I keep it simple. I have an HN4 Zoom recorder. I have 2 microphones. I have 3 cables and I have 2 mic stands. That's it. I don't have a mixer. I wouldn't know what to do with a mixer if I had one. That's all I have. Okay, that's my equipment. Dead easy. Okay, you're now going to make your podcast. How are you going to approach your guests when you've got no track record? Okay, this is something I had to do. So you have to structure an email. I'm going to tell you how I would do it now, not how I did it, because I now do it like this because I think I get a better return rate. Okay, very short. It's not too short, but you know, first para is short introduction. Hi, I'm making a podcast series about X. You know, teenage mental health, say, and we're interested to interview you. Para 2, it's about them. Don't go on about yourself. I wanted to do this because I've been passionate about teenage mental health since whatever. No, it's about them. What's in it for them? Why should they be on your podcast? It would provide a platform to discuss the issue with a new audience, or it would provide you with an opportunity to expand a recent article you wrote about X, Y, and Z, okay, about them. Who are you? My background in this area is X, so say for me with Dead Honest, I work with bereaved families. For how will it happen? Would it be possible to come and talk to you for about 40 minutes, either at your office or remotely by telephone? That's how you do it. And again, if you want, don't bother writing that down. If you want a sort of a template of what I did, I've got that in the notes that I've mentioned before. Okay, you've got your guest, you've got your equipment, and now you need to go through an equipment checklist. And people will tell you this, oh, you must make a checklist. Every interview I've done, I have fucked it up in some way. I have either run out of batteries, I have run out of storage on my SD card. I also have extra batteries and an extra SD card in my equipment kit. I have broken a cable so that I only had 2 cables, one for one mic, one for the other mic. One cable broke. I ended up sitting practically on the poor woman's lap, interviewing her with like this. Okay, that wasn't a good look. I have, oh, yeah, no, my best one, I got the levels right. I had plugged it in. I had put in a new SD card. I had fresh batteries in my recorder, which I always do, always put fresh batteries in your recorder. And everything was perfect, okay? I had an hour. I was in a natural burial ground. Took me quite a while to get to, in a natural burial ground. And I thought, okay, got a really interesting interview. I went to press stop, record. I'd never pressed start. I hadn't recorded anything, nothing, the entire thing, nothing. And you just have to politely say, thank you so much. That's really kind. And thank you, fucking idiot. Excuse my French, but you know, what the actual whatever. Anyway, but that happens. Okay. So if that happens to you, it just happens. We're inexperienced. We're learning. Give yourself a break, you know. That's just the way it is. When you go and talk to an interviewer, if you are going to go and record in somebody's office, I've had this experience as well. Check out that it is a room that is smallish if you can. Ideally, people often put you in their conference room because I think it's nice. And it's like, no, don't worry so much. I'm really happy in the, you know, back office where you've got whatever. Make sure that there's no heavy equipment like big printers, servers, things like that. The thing that's caught me out twice are clocks on the wall. You don't hear them when you're chatting, but when that person, there's a clock on the wall to say, do you mind if I take the clock and put it in another room? And also move them away from a window. Obviously get your phone switched off, but move them away from any hard surface. And if you're interviewing them at home, try and draw curtains and do that. The other thing is, if you can, don't get them to sit on an office chair, because if they're swiveling around or moving back like this, and you've got a microphone here. Okay, sorry about that. Sorry about that. It's the joy of podcasting. Am I back on? Am I back on? I hope I'm back on. Yes, good. Okay, sorry about that. I mean, again, there you go. Yeah, I hope you're not feeling it. As I said, I mean, yeah, don't need to go on about that. Recording remotely. Now, you might be recording remotely now, obviously, because of lockdown. And I did my first Zoom record interview about 3 weeks ago. It will not surprise you to know that I actually threw her out of the meeting 3 times and then threw myself out of the meeting. But again, because this is all new technology for a lot of people and it's the first time they've used it, people are really forgiving. Yeah. So don't stress about that. You know, you're starting out, cut yourself some slack. If you are doing a Zoom meeting, the things that you need them to know, or what you need to ask them is, where are they going to do it? Can they choose a quiet room? What mic are they going to use? Yeah. And how good is their bandwidth, their broadband? Because for me down here in you know, Nowheresville, it can be really inconsistent. Right, now we're going to move on to editing, and I am going to try and get through this quite quickly. When you get to editing, this is a really major part of my production process, and this is not something that can happen quickly if you're making a really, if you're really making a good program and something that you want to be really proud of. Think about the editing software that you're going to use. Are you going to use something quite simple like Audacity? I decided I couldn't use Audacity. It didn't give me enough flexibility. I had to use Audition. So that is a bit more expensive. It's actually quite a lot more expensive. Audacity is free. So that was one of the things which I think you need to be thinking about before you get into editing. What's going to work for you best? I'm going to give you an idea of my process, because again, this is something I'm often asked. You've suddenly got an hour-long interview. Now, what are you going to do with it? Okay, this is what I do. It's really simple. I put it into Otter, which is a transcription program. Otter.ai, I think is it. I'll put it in my notes. I put it into that. That comes out and it looks a bit like, like I then turn it into a document, and it ends up looking, something like this. Yeah. There's her, there's me, there's her, there's me, there's her, whatever, with the time codes. And then I move it over and you put it into a different document, what I call my table document. And what it is that every question and answer is A1. Hang on a second, I can't even read that. What does that say? Yeah, so A1 answer, A1 question, A1 answer. And then it drops down. The next question is A2, as it goes down and down. Then what I do is I literally chop that up. I chop that up and I put it on, I don't know if you can see it, but over there, you can probably see there's a bit of cardboard with a whole lot of bits of paper on it. And I literally cut and paste it and put it on that sheet, and I move the bits around. And then I take it back into the edit. And so I do a paper edit, and then I go back in and do the edit on the computer. And I usually do that probably 2 or 3 times, because I'm trying to get it from an hour and a half, sometimes 2, trying to at least get it down to 40 minutes. And then I've got to try and get it down again. And so that's the way I do it. That's a very simple process, and that works for me. Where are we up to? Do you need a website? I think yes. I personally think a website's a really good idea, and I tell you why. It gives you credibility with your guests. It's where you can host your episodes as well. You can put your episodes on your website. You can post blogs. You can put stuff about yourself. You can put up articles or media that you've got, which is really useful. And it also helps give you a brand. And I think that's quite important. You think about yourself as a brand. And I've got a resource on my notes, which I think is a really good article, and I found it very, very helpful. And I really urge you, don't leave these marketing articles till the time that you're doing the marketing. Read them at the very beginning of the process, because the questions they ask you, that they sort of interrogate you, are questions you should be able to ask before you get started, and they really help you focus. And again, going back to that thing, we're on our own, we don't have any structure, and these documents can help us go, okay, well, if I answer all the questions, I'll get clear in my head. So that's really helpful. Hosting, do your research, see what works for you. I use Buzzsprout. It's quite straightforward for an idiot like me, so that's fairly good. Marketing, there are other people who can talk to you about marketing. I created a Twitter account. I sent emails to friends. I asked contributors to put it out there. I have also written articles where I have a byline at the bottom, which I can promote the podcast on. And I've networked. I've gone to Rise and Shine, do these fantastic, and I'm not just saying that because it's Sarah, but they do these fantastic events. And you will find people like you there. And the reason I'm wanting to get to this is because I have said to you right at the beginning, how are you going to keep your mental health intact? This is the thing that's worked for me. I found 2 people, what I call developers, people developing podcasts, the same sort of level as me in terms of skill base and whatever, but a bit more experience, one bit less with another, but we all have different things. And I met them at these both of them at different industry events, and we just got talking. And if it wasn't for them, I call them my accountability circle. We meet up or get in touch with each other about every 3 weeks. We have a production schedule. We each have our own production schedule. We go, what did you get done? Did you do the script for that? Have you written the show notes for that yet? You said you were going to get an interview with so-and-so. Have they got back to you? They keep you accountable. I cannot stress this enough. If you take nothing away from tonight, that is what got Dead Honest out there. Not well, as you can tell, my technology I'm completely useless with, but that support was so integral to me when I have been feeling so low. And really, now that's it, they've not only loved Dead Honest as much as I do at some of that, but sometimes they love it more. So when I think I'm just being a pathetic procrastinating loser who's got more ambition than talent, should just drop it all and it's ridiculous, and they will come in and scoop me up and help me just hold space until that time passes, or give me some suggestions, or just say, yeah, it's a bit shit, isn't it? But, you know, keep going. You've gone so far. So I would really say, try and reach out to some people. I didn't know them before this. It's that the important thing is that they actually are there to help you. Help you. No one else is looking out for us. Yeah. I mean, even our friends, you know, I mean, I make a podcast about death. Not many of my friends really want to listen to that, you know, and they don't really understand podcasting, you know. And so I would really say that's the really important thing. And it can be, maybe you have got a friend who can do that, or somebody can help you with that. But that if you can go into a pact where you're giving something back to them and they're giving something back to you, and between the, you know, the 2 or 3 of you, 4 of you, whatever, you're really got each other's back. Nothing will help you more stay on the straight and narrow. And there have been times I've been really demoralized and thought, I can't do it. I'm too stupid. I can't even, I'm past it. I'm bored of it now. I'm bored of it, you know, and that's what's kept me going. They've kept me on the straight and narrow. That's Taufik and Natasha. I don't think you're watching, but I just want to say that's my gratitude to you. So what I'm going to leave you with, finally, be micro-ambitious. That's really important. I'm probably going to get so much hate for that. Be micro-ambitious. It will be more work than you can imagine. It really will be. I was thinking today, it's a bit like saying, I'm going to learn a language, and then really learning a language. Find an ally, find your accountability circle, find the people who are going to hold you up when you're feeling really crappy, and tell me how you get on. I'd be really interested to know how you get on. And if you want these notes, I'm really happy to share them with you, and my sort of resources list as well. And you can just email me at hello@deadhonest.com, hello@deadhonest.com, or reach out to me on Twitter, which is Dead Honest Talk. And I'd love to hear how you get on. Yeah. Now, I think I've taken up enough of your time, and I hope you have a really wonderful rest of the evening, and have a glass of wine. Okay. Many, many thanks.